Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening all, and welcome to episode 3 of COP28 Covered, the daily podcast brought to you from our award-winning edie editorial team. This is the show for anyone and everyone who is working in or passionate about global climate action and local sustainability efforts. It is Friday the 1st of December. I'm edie's publisher Luke Nichols, and I'm joined here in a bustling media centre of the COP28 Blue Zone by our deputy editor Sarah George.
Hello.
No Matt Mace, I'm afraid. We'll get onto that in a moment, but it has been a frantic Friday here in the intense heat of Dubai with lots of world leader speeches and associated announcements. We're going to be rounding up everything that's been happening here, along with another 2 special guest interviews live here on the ground. So let's get on with the show. Okay, so yes, welcome along or welcome back to COP28 Covered, hosted in partnership with Race to Zero. We're here in the media centre at the very far end of the Expo Centre in Dubai, and we've been getting our heads around exactly what's been going on here at COP and what it all means for business so that you guys don't have to. And I must say, we've had a fantastic reception to the podcast so far, lots of emails coming in, including answers to our listener quiz question, which we'll reveal later on in the show. A reminder, you can get in touch with us at podcast@fav-house.com. And so today it's a COP fit for a king, because whilst we may have missed out on the fun of opening our first day of Advent calendars today, we instead got to see King Charles, or at least a huge posse of people around the king, as he made his way through the Blue Zone earlier on, along with the likes of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and too many other world leaders to name. So as you can imagine, the security here has been rather intense. It felt very much like how me, Matt and Sarah feel when we rock up to one of the edie events. And at this point I'd usually turn to Matt and ask how it's all going, but I'm sad to say there's an empty seat here in the media centre with us because Matt is unwell, would you believe, struck down on the first day. He said he was feeling off this morning to Sarah and I, and then by the afternoon he was sat outside here in the 28 degree heat telling us that he was feeling cold, so we knew something was up. I guess a reminder amidst all the mayhem and hard work going on here that we are all human, and I know Matt's disappointed about it, but he's gone back to the Airbnb for a lemsip, and hopefully we'll have him back on in the next few days. And that means 3 has become 2 because it's just me and you, Sarah. Please tell me you're feeling all right.
I mean, it would be mean to say that I didn't notice that Matt was missing. I absolutely did, but it's been, I think you called it Frantic Friday, either on or off call, and it definitely has been. It's been challenging to keep up with the whirlwind of paparazzi chasing world leaders around, and just the sheer volume of announcements coming out from the COP presidency and from other initiatives like Bloomberg, like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Yeah, so it's all been pretty busy. Obviously, I'm absolutely gutted for Matt. He did mention how much he wanted to mix things up and not just have you all listening to my voice for this entire series. So fingers crossed for future episodes.
Yeah, so as you say, it's been a pretty intense day all round, loads going on. And on that note, Sarah, I'm going to get in early and ask you to deliver up today's action tracker. So a reminder for listeners that this is our verbal equivalent of the daily analysis article that you're usually in charge of on edie.net, which summarise all of the key developments every day from COP. Now, Sarah, I don't have any backing music to play as we're on the hoof right now, and I didn't bring my speaker. Maybe I'll dub something in afterwards, depending on how creative I'm feeling. Also, I don't have my timer, so I won't keep you exactly to time, but try and keep this round up to what feels like under 2 minutes in your head. So, are you ready?
As ready as I'll ever be.
Good. For our COP28 action tracker rundown, Sarah, take it away.
Sure, so I guess you've mentioned the King, so we'll start there. He gave an impassioned speech to the World Leaders Summit today, essentially recounting his long career of advocacy for nature and highlighting how nature is crucial to the delivery of a net zero world. Real emphasis on how this is possible with the solutions we have now. All that's missing is the will and the coordination. He said as well, speaking to the tag of actionism around this COP, that our grandchildren will not ask what we said today in 2050 when they sit on our laps. They will be living with the consequences of what we did or did not do. So moving stuff from him. Speeches also from Modi and from Lula from India and Brazil respectively. Lots of analysis from their national media on how that will come across, essentially, given perceived weakness on domestic policy. Speaking of which, UK PM Rishi Sunak has also been up today. He essentially reconfirmed a 1.6 billion international climate finance commitment, first confirmed earlier this year, but also added more than 400 million for forests as well. Additionally, he was then ferried away to a private press room. Journalists were told that they couldn't go in there, to firm up an engagement in which he announced £11 billion £11 billion of investment into offshore wind in the UK, mainly from Masdar, the renewables subsidiary of the UAE's state-owned energy firm, and partly from RWE, which is in Germany. So a welcome boost for this sector at a time when costs are climbing, doubtless questions about why more of this isn't coming from British investment. So that's the highlight from the World Leaders Summit and what we saw on the stage, but behind the scenes, countries were hard at work agreeing on new declarations on finance and on food systems. On food systems, more than 130 countries have signed a new Emirates Declaration. This comes ahead of the themed day on food, water and agriculture, at which the UN is expected to publish a roadmap for a 1.5 degree aligned food sector transition. So we'll see to what extent this declaration matches up with that. There are mentions in it of things including adaptation, food loss, behavioural change, better managing livestock and aquaculture, and it mentions low carbon agriculture but not fossil fuels directly. So that's very much still the elephant in the room, as we've seen at the rest of the COP, to be honest. So the COP president has talked about including fossil fuels in the pathway, but then his team have retweeted the UN Secretary General's speech saying that nothing short of a complete phase out is enough. So it looks like it's all very much still to play for around the fossil fuel jargon.
Wow, any more?
There is more, but I shan't go into it. I don't want to bore people.
No, loads of information, isn't there? There's so much to take in. We've covered so much on the site already. So thank you very much for that. And actually, I believe this is pretty much a one-woman show from this point on, as you've done both of our special guest interviews for the show in Matt's absence this afternoon. So who have we got and what are we chatting about?
Yeah, so my first meeting of the morning, when I was far fresher than we are right now, Luke, was with Adam Ellman, who is Google's head of sustainability for the EMEA region, a friendly face at edie. Lots to catch up on, including Google's work towards 24/7 clean energy and how AI could help with climate adaptation. So lots of food for thought there. If we've got any real tech heads listening, any AI junkies, hopefully this will be a treat to start the day.
And then you go straight on to a second?
I do. So a little bit of a change of pace. Our second interview is with Pablo Vieira, Global Director of the NDC partnership. As he'll explain, this is a super important organisation set up to essentially work across the fields of ambition and action with NDCs, which are the nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. So they're each country's plan for delivering its fair share of emissions reduction. So with the global stocktake here, and with numerous big reports in the lead up to this summit showing us a world off track, Pablo's insights are really helpful.
Yeah, it's almost like the national equivalent of a company's transition plan, right? It's like the planning that goes into achieving the aims that are set out at COPs like this. So let's get into both of those discussions then in a row. Here's Sarah's chat with Google's Sustainability Director for the EMEA region, Adam Ellman, followed straight on by her discussion with the NDC Partnership's Global Director, Pablo Vieira, in full.
Yes, so for this next part of the pod, I'm enjoying the shade outside the Ethiopian Green Legacy part of the COP because most of it is blocked off so that the world leaders can do their photo ops. And I'm delighted to have here with me Adam Ellman from Google. Adam, it's great to be catching up. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Sarah. Always good to catch up with you, and certainly very warm here.
No, I know. It's odd that it's 24 degrees today and I'm saying it's a cooler day compared to what we've had so far. So before we melt in the heat, let's get straight into it. I'd love to get your view on what the role is of big digital tech companies like Google at COPs. I know that Google has been a fixture at several consecutively at this point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Google's had a long-standing history working in sustainability, and that's been working collaboratively with businesses, with governments, with cities, with NGOs. And I think COP is a real opportunity to bring all of these organisations together, a really good opportunity for us to figure out how we can partner to drive action. And I think in particular, non-state actors, companies like Google and others, we have a really strong role to play. And we think certainly at Google, we have a huge opportunity to lead the transition through our work on technology and particularly through AI and information.
Of course, and I wanted to get a feel for what you'd like to see coming out of this COP in particular. Is there anything especially that you're looking for in the final agreement that would be a big tick, or is there anything coming up on the sidelines that you can tell us about that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, so I think it's not really our place to sort of comment or debate on the particulars of the technical policies of the outcome of COP. We see our role here really as being a strong voice for them, as I say, the non-state actors, for really bringing the voice of technology, digital platforms, and the opportunity that and the solutions that we have today. This isn't about solutions for the future. This is solutions we have today to drive action. This is the defining decade, and we want to bring a strong voice pushing for that strong and urgent action.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into some of those solutions that you mentioned, and I'll start with climate mitigation. I think the one that most of our regular listeners will probably be aware of is the 24/7 Clean Energy Programme. So it'd be great to catch up on that and maybe touch on any other mitigation tech that you feel that we should flag in this pod.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we were just saying, climate change is one of the biggest and greatest challenges facing everyone at the moment, and it's really important we drive action. For, as you mentioned, in terms of our own operations, we have a net zero 2030 goal, which covers our own operations and our value chain. Hugely challenging, but as part of that, we've set this ambition to run on 24/7 carbon-free energy. So moving beyond annual energy matching, sourcing clean energy locally every hour of every single day. We're making good progress. Last year we reported we were 64% along the way. 7 of our 41 grids already operating at least 90%, and 13 are over 85%. So we're making good progress, and that's both in investing in clean energy and new solutions. In fact, this week we announced our geothermal project with Fervo has gone live. So investing in new technologies to help with that. But actually, a big part of our role at Google is providing the technologies for others to take action, and that's where we're particularly excited about the breakthroughs in AI. We actually launched a new report last week with BCG around the opportunity for AI in climate action, and that report shows that there's a 5 to 10% reduction opportunity by 2030 through AI, and that's 5 to 10% is the same as the entire EU's emissions. So I think we really believe there's a strong opportunity in 3 particular areas around information. So if you think about things like fuel efficient routing in Google Maps, where we're helping people find the most fuel efficient route, on things like prediction, so flood forecasting, where we're able to predict floods 7 days in advance, and then things like optimization. A great example there would be our work with Breakthrough Energy in America Airlines on contrails, those thin white lines where we're account for a third of the global warming potential of the aviation industry, and we're able to cut those by half. So I think to our discussion, this is really about solutions that exist today that can have a real impact, not just the things we need in the future.
Yeah, and ones that can be delivered in partnership as well, because I know that we've got a lot of companies signed up to things like 24/7 clean energy and fuel routing. So what's that been like, galvanising partners for some of the things you've just talked about, Adam?
Absolutely, as you say, this really is about creating a movement and working with others, and that's so much of what we do at Google. And so, to your earlier question, it's part of the reason why we're here, to meet with those partners, to help bring other people on board, to share our progress, to share our knowledge, to share our learnings along the way, and also to learn from others as well. So yeah, that partnership piece, that cross sectors, across private sector, non-private sector, is hugely important, and that's why COP's a great opportunity. We've got people on the ground who are really serious about this. How do we drive action? How do we drive traction?
And as well as collaboration, something that's come up is trust, which is a key ingredient of collaboration. So just yesterday we saw the first bunch of loss and damage funding committed, and the discussion is very much on what can we do to get solutions to the places that most need them. So you've talked there about great tech that can help cut emissions. How do we get those to the emerging economies who have emissions going up? Or you've talked about flood mitigation tech and flood forecasting. How do we get these to the emerging and developing markets that most need them?
Yeah, well, the good news is we're already taking those technologies there. They already exist, and actually, whilst it's increasingly in the global north we're seeing the issues, obviously many of these issues have been impacting the global south for a long time, and so things like flood forecasting, our wildfire detection tools are already available in those regions. Fuel efficient routing, we are looking to expand globally, so we're always looking to take those technologies globally. And we spoke earlier about the investments in things like clean energy. Again, because we're taking an approach which is 24/7, we need to do that locally wherever we operate. So we are really investing in infrastructure and taking the technology right around the world, including the emerging and developing countries as well.
Yeah, I get that a big part of 24/7 is getting beyond those renewable energy certificates, so guaranteeing a bit more, robust additionality,
Absolutely.
Which is so important to these markets.
Absolutely, we want to make sure we're decarbonising grids equally right around the world. So the sort of Google's been matching 100% renewable electricity for 6 years running now, but we know that means there are parts of the world and times of the day where we're still reliant on fossil fuel from the grid, and we don't think that's good enough, which is why we're pushing for 24/7. But again, why we need to work with others, we need to do this collaboratively, and we need to figure out where those partnerships are which really drive action.
Great. Well, Adam, I won't keep you from meeting with your partners for any longer, and definitely not out in this heat. Thank you so much for your time on the podcast today.
Thanks, Sarah. Always good to catch up.
Hello, it's Sarah here again, and I'm very much still firmly in the blue zone for the last interview of the afternoon, but I'm not flagging and I'm not feeling de-energised because I'm delighted to be talking to the NDC partnership at this crucial moment, right after the first draft text of the global stocktake. And sitting across from me I have Pablo, who is the global director of the NDC partnership. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Very happy to share this moment with you.
No, thank you so much once again. I think it'd be great to have an introduction to the NDC partnership, who are probably not that familiar to, people that don't come along to COP every year.
Yes. So the NDC partnership is an initiative that brings together countries, both developed and developing, and international institutions to work together to advance the goals of the Paris Agreement. It was launched back in Marrakesh, 1 year after the Paris Agreement, to support developing countries that had the ambition to advance their NDCs, their commitments, as soon as possible, and to demonstrate that through collective efforts, through the effective mobilization of support, countries could deliver on their promises. Today we have more than 220 members, and we're supporting 90 developing countries from around the world, from major emerging economies all the way to LDCs and SIDS, supporting them both on ratcheting their ambition in the different rounds of the NDCs, but also implementing their NDCs through the effective mobilization of support and finance as they move forward. So we've been working with countries for now over 7 years, and this has allowed us to understand what is necessary to bring together the resources from different partners, different members. We work with UN organizations, with multilateral development banks, with civil society organizations, and with most of the international big players, donors, to bring together their support to support country needs.
And you've talked there about the two important things with NDCs, which is ambition and delivery, which is obviously what everyone's focusing on at the moment. We know that this COP will play host to the first global stocktake. There is a hope that this will motivate meaningful updates to NDCs to close the gap that highlights, but there are also fears that it could not. So is this a moment? What can be done to really take this moment and seize it?
Yes, I think definitely the global stocktake will show us that there's three big gaps. Ambition gap, the implementation gap, and that's very much associated also with the finance gap. What's important to understand, I think, is that those are interconnected. Countries can do a lot about raising their ambition, but ambition on paper that is not implemented will take us nowhere. So it's very important to make sure that as countries advance their ambition through new NDCs, that they do it in a way that allows them to implement effectively those NDCs, to see not only the climate benefits, but also the promised social and economic benefits. So what we need to do first is to have a strong political moment here at COP, where the global stocktake sends a very strong message. You need to go back to the drawing board. You need to come back in 2025 with more ambitious NDCs, ideally aligned with Paris with the 1.5 degrees. But also very important to send the message that That will come with support for developing countries so that they can do a good job in developing these NDCs, meaning not only just putting a number in terms of ambition, but going through a strong process that brings together the whole of government, the whole of society in the development of the NDC so that there's ownership, and also that has high quality in terms of data, models, analysis, so that these are realistic. NDCs need to be implemented, and they need to be investment ready, so that countries then can go forward and mobilize the necessary finance to implement them. And then for that, they also need strong signals from the international community in terms of there's available support, and we are realigning the finance flows so that you can actually implement these NDCs. So it's all interconnected, but we need to make sure that there's available support. And at the NDC partnership, we launched last year a thematic call to support developing countries update their NDCs. We did it in the lead up to Glasgow, where we supported almost 70 countries update their NDCs. All of them submitted better, more ambitious NDCs. We hope to do the same this time around. And we want to take a step further and making sure that they're implementable and investment ready this time around.
I wanted to touch on that investment ready part because recently the UN published its emissions gap report, and it showed that implementing the conditional bits of NDCs could shave around 0.4 degrees off the temperature increase by 2100. So that's significant. Most of those conditional parts are, as you say, in developing emerging economies. So it would be great to hear a little bit more about how to make these NDCs investable and what is being done to unlock that finance to get those crucial conditional parts of the NDCs done.
Yes, and I would even say that it's fundamental to unlock the finance for the unconditional parts, because the unconditional parts are not only public finance from governments. Governments count on their ability to mobilize the private sector to implement this part. So it is in general a need for countries to have a strong strategy and the enabling environments to allow them to mobilize the finance that is necessary. So I think that there needs to be work both on the demand side, on the countries where they need a lot more capacity to be able to drive the implementation of their NDCs. They need to adjust their enabling environments. They need to make sure that they're developing projects that are bankable, that are accessible to funding from the GCF, but also that they mobilize private sector finance. And they need to make sure that they're mapping and blending the different sources of finance so that they can effectively fund everything that they need to do. But we also need to work with the providers of finance, from the public multilateral development banks or funds like the Global Climate Fund to the private sector, making sure that we're leveraging the public funding in a way that brings the private sector funding. So it's very important to continue working on the MDB reform, making sure that the flows of public funding are going in the right direction, that countries have the necessary resources, and that we work together so that the public funding available through the GCF, for example, is an enabler to leverage private funding. So what we're working with countries is we've developed an investment planning guide that will allow countries to understand if they have the right enabling environments, if they have the right capacity, if they're mapping all the different sources of finance, and if they have the capacity to develop projects to the level of bankability that will allow them to mobilize finance, both public and private. And that's a big part of the effort that countries are doing right now, looking at the implementation of their NDCs.
So, yeah, lots going on in that field and an on-to-do list for you guys, I'm sure. I wanted to touch, though, on a third A. So we've talked about ambition and action, but I want to talk about accountability as well, because when I talk to people that maybe aren't super involved in climate diplomacy, they ask, well, what's being done to make sure that countries deliver the Paris Agreement, deliver their NDCs? Why did the previous UN biodiversity targets just sort of go unmet, and that was a given? So I'd love to ask about what could be done really to track progress and build in accountability. Yeah,
the reality is that unfortunately the Paris Agreement was not able to deliver an accountability mechanism. A process like this that is built on consensus makes it very difficult to be able to build accountability, not only about ambition, but also around finance, for example. So it is the responsibility of international organizations, NGOs, for example, to track the ambition of NDCs, and there's a few that do that tell, is this ambition strong enough? Is it fair? Is it comparable to their responsibility? But then there's an important role at the country level, from civil society, from academia, from journalists, to put pressure on the governments so that they are doing the right thing. And it should come also from the private sector, for example. They need strong signals in terms of the direction of travel of the government. And if that doesn't come at the highest level, then it's very difficult. They need to understand if the commitment on an NDC, for example, is compatible with the development of new projects, laws, policies that might go in the opposite direction. So keeping accountable by non-government stakeholders the government is fundamental, because the actual Paris Agreement will not do it. So everyone needs to be involved in that accountability mechanism.
No, and I'm sure that's something a lot of listeners for this episode are involved in. We've seen so much of that coming out from UK PLC in the lead up to this COP that is a source of hope for me personally. But Pablo, I know you've probably got a jam-packed agenda for the rest of the afternoon and evening, so I'll let you get going. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on this episode.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and let's hope that over the next 2 weeks we see a lot of progress and that we walk away from Dubai with hope.
There we go. Thank you so much to both Adam and Pablo there. Now we've breezed through this third episode of COP28, covered loads of great ground there, but of course no episode is complete without our all-important listener quiz. So every day we're asking listeners a COP-related question to close out the show, and we're giving out eco-vouchers to the huge value of 23 United Arab Emirates dirham, or 5 Great British pounds. So spend it wisely if you do win this. So Quizmaster Sarah, remind us of yesterday's question.
Yeah, for yesterday's question, I asked for the population of Dubai to the nearest million people, if possible.
Yeah, so the trivia question. Lots of people emailed in, and as I said in the last episode, that our winner would be selected at random. However, I'm never one to stick to my own rules, and that's true on this occasion because there was an email that came in that stood out to me because it had both the correct quiz answer and a nice note along with it. The email was from a Tammy Brody. And Tammy said, I started listening to your coverage of COP28, wanted to thank you all for the work you're doing, really enjoy your podcast. I didn't write this myself, and the information you've put out, especially as someone who can't travel to COP but is still trying to be involved. She lives in Massachusetts, just outside of Boston in the US, and she's involved in the local climate activist scene out there. And she goes on to say that the larger global climate activist scene is a deeply important one to her as well, and this podcast is making it more accessible to her. So thanks for that, Tammy. Flattery gets you everywhere in this business. Well-deserved winner of yesterday's listener quiz. Sarah, over to you for today's question.
Sure, so for today's quiz question, I have to go for the World Leaders Summit. Today our question is, which president spoke directly after King Charles, who had that challenging job? I'd be willing to accept the name of the country or the name of the president.
Okay.
Or both.
So who graced the stage and gave a keynote after King Charles. So email your answers in to podcast@fav-house, along with any other flattery or things you might think put you in with a chance of getting a shout out, and we'll reveal the answer and the winner tomorrow. And it's another packed one, I think, tomorrow, because we move on to day 2 of the World Leaders Summit, plus a host of other big events taking place and announcements expected. We currently have no idea if Matt's going to be well enough to join us tomorrow, but Sarah, all being well, very quick teaser on what's coming up tomorrow.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Luke, it's day 2 of the World Leaders Summit, so while the keynote speeches part may be out of the way in the main, we still have around half of the nations here that yet to set out their positions, so expect lots more national media scrambling to get a picture of their policymakers. It's also the second day of the Business and Philanthropy Forum. We're expecting big names like Bill Gates, also COP26 President Alok Sharma will be there giving an address, US Climate Envoy John Kerry. In a dream world, that would be my podcast roundup, but all being well, I have some great in-depth talks around finance lined up on the sidelines, and we'll see whether it's my voice you hear delivering them or whether Matt re-enters the fold.
Yes, somehow I think that's unlikely, but we can hope that it's a bit of everyone. That's it from us today. We'll be back for that next episode tomorrow, 2nd of December. But until then, it's a goodbye from Sarah.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me. Goodbye.